This is Changeling the podcast.
Welcome to Changeling the podcast, where the weather is always seasonable one way or another, whether you like it or not. I am your host, Puka, and I am joined by Fetch. Greetings, Fetch.
It's a pleasure to be here. Looking forward to talking about courts and politics, which, as I say that, sounds like it's going to be absolutely tragic. But I assure our listeners, we have something that's going to be amazing this week.
So yes, we are talking about the politics and whatnot, the courts, and these are embodied for Changeling the Lost First Edition in the tome Lords of Summer. I also want to point out, just before we get into this, because it came up on the Discord, there is a recently released homebrew for 2nd edition called Book of Courts by the None More Dark Publishing folks. And I wanted to head off at the pass. We are talking about the courts. We are not talking about 2nd edition. I do think we will need to look at that book eventually, because I'm glad there is somebody who did a deep dive of the courts. And previously they also did Book of Seemings. So I think both of those are going to be good things to look into for next season.
I agree. I've read Book of Seemings and love it, so I'm really curious to see what they're doing for the courts.
Yeah. But for now, we're just going back in time to 2008 or whatever, and looking at an elder take on the courts. So the back blurb says, this book includes an elaboration on freeholds, their traditions and advantages, detail on the 4 great courts, from magic and practices to political intrigues, and 16 new entitlements to spice up a chronicle, or add an entirely new dimension.
Boy, do they deliver on all of that. We'll get into it soon enough, but this book solidifies some things presented in previous books in ways that I absolutely love, while also throwing me for a loop. That's part of what's going to make this a very interesting book to discuss.
I think there were a few loops that I was thrown as well for, and I'm curious to see whether it's the same as the ones that were for you.
First loop, of course, is that cover.
Yeah.
This cover depicts 3 changelings against a backdrop of what I'm guessing is Miami. They're on a walk. There's some palm trees in the background, some buildings far behind them, big summer afternoon, summer sun, and all that sounds lovely, but I feel like something's wrong with the changelings that we have here. We have what on the right side appears to be a zombie tourist who is truly gigantic. Then in the middle, kind of vaguely in front of him, is a gentleman with pointed ears, black spectacles, a wisp of hair being pushed off to the side, and for no reason I can figure out, his hand just thrust straight forward down, covering his groin.
I think they edited out a cane, and I don't know why.
Oh,
but...
a cane would have been better. A cane
that's cane hand, right?
That's cane hand. Yeah, now that makes sense. And then on the left side of the picture is a woman wearing a bikini top and shorts with spots and wraparound sunglasses, and her hair is poofed out back behind her head in some kind of animalistic way, but I'm not sure what it's meant to be. The thing I really want to drive home here is that these 3 do not look like they were all drawn to be on the same picture. Something about the perspective looks really off about it, and it's the first time I've seen the cover where I just don't like this one.
Yeah, I mean, it's not badly done. It's just like, it doesn't arrest in the same way that the other ones have so far.
Really hard to top the book that we had right before this.
Yeah. A curious, eclectic group. On the warpath, presumably, because it's for summer.
Yes, and one might think so, but it's really not clear. If you didn't have Lords of Summer on there, I wouldn't know what this book is about.
Yeah.
Shall we talk about the introductory story? And gosh, I forgot how cool that art piece is.
Yeah, see, the interior art makes much more sense. I'm like, well, that should have been the cover. But...
oh my god, you're right. That would have been amazing as a cover. So, it's a beach. Woman is in kind of an action slide pose, her arms spread wide, staring steely-eyed at the camera, pure intensity. Further in the foreground is a person who's body is laying down. They have teeth for eyes. Their mouth is sewn shut.
Oh, I
Clearly
didn't
dead.
even notice that.
I did notice that until literally just now, too. Behind her on the beach, approaching, are a horde of monstrosities who they look like hobgoblins in this context, not changelings, though I forget what the story says. And every one of them is differently drawn and amazing. We've got a person with a crustacean head. We've got a long, tall, ghost-like person. We have a centipede with a human head that's grinning at her from off to the side, and it is all gorgeously detailed with even more monsters further in the background casting shadows. Oh, I forgot to note the woman is also tossing daggers kind of off the screen up and away in the direction of the viewer. It's really cool.
They're not there for free hugs, for sure.
What's the story?
Well, it's really her story, I would say, because we open up with this details of a battle in the hedge on the longest day of summer, where a group of changelings are taking on a pair of keepers. And the narrator, Ramona Ringfinger, presumably the woman throwing the knives in the art, is letting loose all of her anger and sorrow to take them out. And then it flashes back to the year before, when she's convincing Grandfather Thunder of Miami that these two keepers, who were her keepers, are making inroads on the city, so he should put together a war party, which she will lead. And then 5 years back, so showing her shortly after getting through the hedge, presumably, going through training and showing the moment when she finds her anger by thinking of those keepers, thereby becoming a combat badass. I'm not clear, she has this bruise on her ring finger, which is where her name comes from, and I'm not clear, what the significance of that is supposed to be. And I'm also not clear, so is the plot that she's lying about her keepers making the inroads into Miami so that she can get backing to go after them on her personal quest?
I'm so glad you said that because I did not know what the point was of the flashback. So I love the pacing. I love both pieces of interior art. There's a second picture I'd forgotten about where she's kicking a punching bag and we see her keeper
Mm-hmm.
shadows in the background. But the flashbacks seem unnecessary. Even if it's cool detail, it's just not clear what purpose they serve.
Yeah. Overall, I think it's just a good story that shows the ethos of summer, at least. You get a sense for them boiling with rage, and that tracks. I'd like to briefly point out that this was written by Stephen DePesa, Jess Hartley, Malcolm Shepard, John Sneed, and Charles Wendig. Thanks. Credits? Yes, themes. This is a book about summer's dynamism, but especially about conflict. It is about the outdoors, it seems, but then also about hunting or being hunted. It is about wrath, either pointed at the keepers, or in righteous directions, or just in revenge. I'll buy the tie between summer and conflict more than the attempted tie between winter and diversity that we got in Winter Masks. Some of these seasonal theme alignments work better than others, but it works here.
I agree.
The fragmented traditions section that we get on the first page here is pointing to something that I've been craving. So the book will deal with more information about the structure of Fae society in between freeholds, because they make a big deal about how, of course, there can't be nations or high kings, but in Lost, the connective tissue is tradition. And for me, I never really needed the kingdoms and whatnot in Changeling the Dreaming, but I also think the Fae in that game also generally like being around each other more as a general rule, and they flock more easily. The monarchies are there for players who want them, and Changeling the Dreaming has never been without customization. So, I don't know, seeing them go in this direction, seeing if there's this alternate approach that they take. Really, what I don't want is for them to go down the same road as the alternate freehold options we got in Winter Masks, because I think, as we discussed, those didn't all work.
Yeah, there were a lot of issues with that. One thing they don't bring up here is that they get into reasons for why they don't have their kings. They just say simple logistics, there would need to be a lot more of them, and at the same time, there's a lot of movement in between. So there is a society, just not enough to have that structure. One thing I think is also missing from this equation is that changelings really don't like the idea of being subject to a single person. So one person declaring themselves the equivalent of High King David would probably not go over very well with the Lost.
Yeah. Going into this, I was guessing we would see different sort of laws and codes and traditions unique to each court. And we get some of that, but maybe not as consistently as I would have expected from the way it's presented here. More granular. We get a little thing on heraldry as a field of interest. I don't think it actually ends up mattering at all. They kind of mention this and then it never comes up again. So, yeah, heraldry. It's great. Structurally, we have 3 chapters. Chapter 1 is Notes on Freeholds and Politics. Chapter 2 will be deep dives into the Great Courts, which is like the meat of this book. And then Chapter 3 is 12 new entitlements. So is there anything that you were particularly looking forward to before diving in?
I'm really looking forward to talking about the general structure of freeholds and changeling populations, since I think that this is going to do a lot to establish some of the elements that I love most about the game as a whole.
Nice. Well, why don't you tell us about Chapter 1, Freeholds?
So it opens up with a story about a changeling getting pulled over by a couple of heavies from the Miami Summer Court, who are accusing him of privateering. Unfortunately for him, does not talk his way out of a ride to visit Grandfather Thunder.
This story made me feel awkward, I have to say.
I was not 100% sure what was going on with the implications of the story, but it was vaguely uncomfortable in that way that I'm starting to realize a lot of the Miami material is uncomfortable. Though, speaking of which, have you noticed in Autumn Nightmares, they spent some work out saying that the supplement was going to focus upon how you could use this stuff for the Miami campaign. And they kind of abandoned that for
They
the
did.
other supplements.
Again, as I said last time, maybe by the time Rites of Spring came out, they were kind of sensing we're going to need to go beyond the planned ending of this game because people are really responding to it and want more from it. I wonder if, had they kept it self-contained, they would have made it more Miami localized. But by this point, they were like, we need to branch out more, we need to make it more general because people aren't running Miami games. And so maybe that had some aspect to it.
And the better for it, because
Yeah.
this book opens with demographics, that thing which every player craves. The answer to the question of how many changelings are in the world? How many changelings are in my city? I've seen debates about this for populations of everything, and very rarely do any of the game lines give you an exact number for anything. The only one I can think of that gives you a hard number from the outset is Promethean. I think in first edition they specifically say that there are 100 Prometheans at any given time, and that number remains stable. But for the rest of them, you kind of have to guess or poll based upon whatever a sourcebook happens to give you for numbers. Like Miami had how many? What was it? 60, 80, 100?
Oh, it says here, slightly more than 100.
There we go. Changelings tend to congregate in large cities with high immigration populations and lots of mythology around them. This is partially because big cities are easy to hide in, but seems to have more to do with the dream logic of Arcadia. Nobody knows the exact number of changelings, but 100 is considered a lot for a major city, with some truly huge cities like New York and Chicago surprisingly having only a few dozen.
Yeah.
And LA being specified as having the most at 400 divided between 4 freeholds. I love the idea of having a lot of changelings. I honestly thought that their numbers would be much higher than this. I always imagined that a major metropolitan area with a few million people would have a few hundred changelings scattered around, since unlike vampires, they don't have to feed upon blood, and while they certainly have their problems, a big thing for them is reintegrating into human society. I'm also not a fan of them saying, New York and Chicago, they don't have a lot of. Maybe I would have been okay with them saying these numbers can veer away from what you would expect them to. So feel free to say that your little town happens to have a gigantic changing population, or that your major city has surprisingly only a handful of them.
There is a sidebar that kind of points to that from a game design perspective, but not the oddity of it within the context of the game. Like, surely the changelings themselves must be like, wait, why are there so few of us here? You know? And New York in particular, they point to, the paths to Arcadia are more about large-scale mortal migrations and the city's growth rate and the strength of myths around the city. So New York used to have a lot more back in, like, the early 1900s. And I'm thinking, do they think those things are all over in this century? So, yeah, it was weird.
Agreed. I forget what I meant when I wrote the dream logic of Arcadia, though, if I recall correctly, the idea was that Arcadia people tend to draw upon symbols, and big cities have lots of symbolism to go with them, so that is a big reason that people wind up being deposited there after their durance, even if they don't have a strong personal connection. Am I remembering this correctly?
I think that sounds reasonably right. But yeah, this opening, I wasn't hanging with it.
I might as well add as a final note on this that the section about changing demographics is pushing against something established in the core book, where they made it pretty clear that changelings show up only if they have something strong to tie them to where they came from. But between this book and several others, you'll find that the answer gradually became more nebulous, which I think is in general for the best, just could have been handled better.
Agreed.
Now for the really fun part, though, the character of a freehold. This is all about how do you make a freehold feel alive? And again, a freehold is a vaguely defined concept throughout the books, which you would think correlates to the edges of a city, but they don't all agree on that one. I suggest our readers think of it as being a city is normally a freehold, but they're usually equivalent for the sake of this section. They say a freehold's character is narratively informed by the mortal city around it and the politics of the time. The book advises assigning a virtue and vice to a freehold as a way of spinning up ideas. I think that's a neat shorthand for coming up with something.
Yeah.
But let's talk about commons. These, we learn, are neutral grounds for the courts to meet for both informal gatherings and major parties. They also serve as short-term housing for changelings with no other means, such as those who just got dropped out of Arcadia and won't or cannot go back to their mortal life. Such commons are massive hollows in the hedge, whose features might change with a ruling court. I thought that was pretty cool to imagine you step into this other world, and during winter it's all icicles and frozen trees, but during the spring it's blooming with flowers. If, however, it's set in the mortal world, then it's either something hidden away in the cracks of human society or purchased with fantastic wealth, but always secured against intrusion by contracts. So now we raise the question of how do freeholders explain why they're all hanging out? This comes up if, say, the changelings rent out a ballroom or area at a country club or a bit of space anywhere. And everybody nearby, maybe people who work there, are confused about why several dozen people, all of whom look and act at least a little eccentric, are gathering here. The changelings invent cover stories, like being part of a club or a gang.
LARPers.
LARPers would be the best answer, obviously. There is a sidebar on how a freehold's cover story, if lived well enough, might entitle freeholders to certain social bonuses and penalties. That could be a cool touch. It's a good way of bringing the entire freehold together. And this sense of bringing the freehold together is a big part of what I love about this chapter. In previous books, they've been bittersweet about freeholds and sometimes pretty antagonistic towards the very conception of them. But this book gets into a lot of what makes freeholds cool and interesting and why you'd want to be a part of them. After we talk about how your cover stories, we get into the question of how the freehold affords all of their nice things. Some freeholds, everybody pays their own way. In others, the freehold is how they make money, like each court owning a restaurant in a chain or functioning as part of a Grand Theft Auto conspiracy. I just love the idea of every one of the courts having its own restaurant chain, and the parent company is basically the freehold itself, and you can have them do different cooking competitions or trying to impress critics as part of their rituals for getting together. Isn't that just so cool to think about?
See, I think that would be too visible. I think they would do something lower key, like Ogre King or something.
Like what?
Like Ogre King. Come down to Ogre King, home of the clobber or something.
Oh.
Something franchisable that's easy to slip under the radar. Then they get a write-up in the local newspaper and suddenly the keepers are banging at their door.
Listen, you've got to live your best life.
Importantly, you do get social benefits, like from whatever ties you do end up creating for your cover story.
Yes, if I recall right, it's just like a +2 to certain dice and -2 to others.
Similar to freeholds in C20.
It's not nothing. After that, the book notes that some freeholds have signs of affiliation to either the freehold itself or to their individual courts. We then learn more about the transfer of power. It's often symbolic, happening at the equinox and solstices, but some freeholds put it to a ceremonial duel or an auction?
Sure, yeah. Evidently.
Look, I wouldn't run it that way, but I would totally play in somebody's game where the question is who's going to run the freehold during summer, and summer is having to bid on their own season.
See, this is another case where seeing more about the inter-freehold sort of connections would have been helpful because, and also the perspectives of the Lost in the setting. Because if you're living in a freehold and you are aware that the next city over, they have this very elegant ceremonial transfer of power that's gone very smoothly for decades, and you're living in a freehold where it's just like an anything goes auction where the highest bidder gets everything, people are going to start moving from one to the other, you know? So those dynamics I think would be interesting to explore.
That's a great point. I'm thinking about whether that mirrors how things work in real world politics.
A little bit.
The smaller freeholds, we talked in a previous book about like what happens if you don't really have all the different courts, and they talk about that again here. And the perspective is a little different. It says smaller freeholds may not have all four courts represented, and so find alternatives, such as the Winter Court of Winnipeg taking on flavors of autumn and spring, while summer rules for just a quarter of the year. Some freeholds have taken on a system similar to the directional courts, where each court rules a part of the city. Seems perfectly reasonable. Misses a bit of the nuance that we had with things like the Tornado Court from
Yeah.
which book was that? Was that Winter?
I think it was Winter Masks, yeah.
But what I like about this section is that, again, whereas that previous book painted this as a confusing situation where there's a lot of open questions and not a lot of good answers, they make it feel pretty simple and standard here with a few different ways that you can handle it, all of which make sense and feel like what you would normally wind up doing. After that, we get into the juicy subject of cities with multiple freeholds. The three main factors are population, travel distance within the city, a history of conflict based on either mortal or fey culture, or social class. And when I'm saying those last two, I'm feeling like I wonder whether they explored that well enough or properly.
They did
bringing that up. What do you think, Puka?
No, so very specifically, page 21, linking freehold division to race riots was unnecessary. And then there's this extensive discussion of what it's like to be a middle class changeling that felt very apologist, and I'm like, this isn't working for me. So, in principle, sure, those could be things that divide up a city along freehold lines. In the way that it's given examples here, I'm like, I think most storytellers could probably come up with something better, at least for their own city.
Well put. Next up, and finally, we have conflict about freeholds. And it tells us that both intra and inter-freehold conflict is actually quite rare because changelings value their integrity and bonds of trust on one hand, while also recognizing the truth they are the only ones who win when changelings go to war with each other.
Well put.
Not the answer I was expecting, but also contradicts what we've gotten from previous books. Again, I don't mind. I like it when freeholds work together. It's just a surprising take to have 5 books into the game.
Maybe they got to this one and they're like, you know what, we just don't want to write that whole chapter that would need to be 60 pages to talk about inter-freehold conflict. So let's just say it doesn't happen much.
They say even the hierarchy trends toward beneficent, which, again, I think is also pretty different from the other books and their main setting. Like, Miami does not seem like a place where most of the monarchs are very nice people.
Yeah.
But I do like the idea of the freehold working for you. It's a idealistic thought, and it's certainly one that I've done in my own games where I've said, hey, the monarchs, they act as free mentors for everybody because they want you to succeed and they don't want problems for the freehold, so they want to talk to you. Finally, we have a sidebar that changelings trend away from bigotry because their shared experience in Arcadia gives them new perspective, but a reminder that to some people, their identity is a key part of them. I wonder whether that would be true of changelings, given that their experiences in Arcadia sometimes mean that they are gone for decades and things change without them, along with the fact that being given new information is already a purity break for most people in the real world.
Yeah.
To say nothing of changelings who really have a hard time dealing with that. I feel like they could have given more thought to the question of how, if at all, does this change a changeling's perspective on things. I could certainly see some compartmentalization, at least, that changelings might say, well, we're all in this together. And then somebody points out, okay, yeah, but then we look at the way you handle your mortal life, and that doesn't seem like you're doing that properly. And they go, oh, well, no, that's different. There's not really a discussion of that aspect of it. What do you think about that? What do you think about chapter 1 overall?
I really thought it would be a lot longer. It's a start, but most of the sections just kind of feel like vague strokes and then an example or two without a lot of foundation for how can I, the storyteller, make this work in my game. Like, Changeling the Lost really builds itself on being metaplot light and, oh, we're not going to like have extreme depth on these very specific settings and people and whatever. But the trade-off you get with that is they try to have it both ways in terms of specificity and generality, like concrete suggestions about the story beats to plant and the connections that you create between them would have gone a long way. But instead, we get generalities and then these allusions to, like, well, in this freehold, there was a race riot that blah, blah, blah. And there's no depth to it. There's no context to it to explain how you're connecting A to B. And for some cases, like that one, it's necessary. So the approach to kind of laying all of this out frustrated me a little bit. I'm not really sure what reasons the Lost would have to compete except for petty ones and or ones that feel contrived by the story. So I want to know more about matters of principle. What are the disagreements about morality or the method of governance that could lead to hostile takeovers or the exodus of Fae from one to the other? We saw freeholds in the other book where they essentially have a caste system or a slave system. So, like, surely there are changelings who are going to go make war over that, right? What sorts of social control do leaders use to keep their freehold in line? Like, I had all these questions along the way, and this section didn't really address them, which frustrated
You
me.
make an excellent point, and despite my affection for freeholds that largely work in harmony, there is a lot of room for something in between. There's basically no conflict in freeholds, and
Total war.
these freeholds have a caste system and or are constantly at war. Just off the top of my head, you could say that in one city, it turns out that court's glamour is just so much more abundant than the other three that it's created a sense of conflict between them. Or you can have things where changelings come to identify very strongly with the ethos of their courts, but they find that they don't have enough resources to go around to easily provide for all four, so they might fight over that. Or you have a situation where there's two freeholds that are within the same region as each other, and they argue over things like, hey, two Fae are showing up here that didn't before. We think you're sending all of your problems over here for us to deal with, and we don't like that. I do think that what I'm saying would require a lot more nuance to make it effective, but you are right that we could have used more in this section. And I would like to believe that information on the seasonal courts will give us more information on that. But
Well, luckily.
do you think they do a good job of giving us that conflict? Are we getting to a good part here?
I do think chapter 2 holds more water than chapter 1 for most of what they're discussing. Yes. In chapter 1, they try to step outside the courts, and it just doesn't land. There's not enough meat on those bones. And I think probably that might have been because the courts are really the heart of this book, and then maybe they went back and said, oh, you know what, we need a chapter at the start that's not court specific, that we could talk in generalities about freeholds, and it didn't get the same depth and attention, maybe? I don't know.
You would hope that if they did the seasonal section first, then it would be easier to write the generalities one because you have the structure of the courts and have an understanding of how they would interact with each other.
Yeah, you'd think.
So, chapter 2 opens up with a picture of 4 changelings riding upon noble steeds. And every one of them is dressed up in glorious finery of different sorts. Whether it's a beautiful robe, a choker full of diamonds and coiffed up hair, riding upon a horse made out of what I think is flame, or a grinning man wearing a suit and tie over which is an elegant robe, and his hair is incredibly wild with antler ears coming out of it, running upon a steed of beautiful darkness. This already looks so cool. If I didn't know better, you could have popped this into a Changing the Dream book and said, here's the cover for something about the she, because that is very
Yeah,
much
for sure.
feeling like that. And now the story itself to go with this one. It was a thing that had not been seen in many years, when the 4 rode together as they had in old. The Queen of Summer took the vanguard as her rightful place. Her steed was brass and fire, and her sword a blazing brand. A wall of heat ran before her, the blast furnace harbinger of a wrath that would shatter mountains. To her left rode the Emerald King, the antler crown upon his head, laughing as he knocked an elf-shot arrow to his bow of living wood. His steed was living wood and leaf and vine, the flowers of its mane pouring forth an incense of life and love and war. To the Crimson Queen's right rode the King of Autumn, as grim and terrible as the King of Spring was merry and mad. Long chains of lead were his weapon, each link engraved with a promise that a man had died to keep. His horse was smoke and soot and shadow, a thing of autumn witchcraft that made not the slightest sound, and dried leaves blew in his wake. And with them, ever shifting in her place, was the Winter Queen, seeming first to be almost before them, and then riding in their shadows. No weapon was visible in her hands, but she was not unarmed. Her steed was a rolling wave of snow like an avalanche, its flurries mingling with the mantle of purest winter that hung about her like another cloak. They cracked the asphalt beneath them as they rode through the gateway that pitched wide into the thorns. They carried death with them.
Cue music.
I love this story more than anything else you can read in Changing the Lost. This drives home how this game can capture an epic fantasy feel. This is what your characters can be like. This is what people in a freehold can be like. It's a matter of putting the pieces together, and I think nothing better captures that vision that all those pieces are trying to conjure for you than this story does.
Yeah, it shows what they're capable of when they all work together. Wouldn't that be nice?
Now, let's hear the courts themselves.
Yeah.
What do we have in this chapter?
So this is the Chomker. This is half the book. Yeah, getting into it, the seasonal courts. The introductory matter here establishes again that the 4 seasonal courts are among the most widespread, so that's what we're focusing on, and points to the core emotion of each court as its modus operandi. And they talk about the narrative power, the plot hooks, and the characters and the symbolism provided through their lenses being maybe the strongest in the game, more than Kith or even seeming beyond a very individual level. But naturally, even the most fundamental bits they're talking about are given the framing of use it only if it seems interesting. I prefer to have a little bit more solid foundation, but meh. Anyway.
That caveat of using this only if it seems interesting is important because they take strong directions with these courts. And if you do not like it, it's good to know that you do not have to deal with that in the rest of the books. On the other hand, if you do like it, you're going to find plenty of material for a court in here.
So each write-up, which we will start flying through, explores the court's associated emotion and overall ethos, the way they recruit new members and structure themselves, the roles they have in freeholds and the relations they have with others, and then each gets some new contract and an entitlement. So diving in, we begin with spring. So, we hear about how others paint the spring court as flighty and hedonistic, but in truth, the court sings and dances to keep their earthly pleasures front and center and remind them why they escaped and why they'll never go back. Although, it's kind of like, is there no pleasure in Arcadia? I thought that some of them had to deal with that, but...
Wait, so you're questioning whether Arcadia has its own pleasures based upon what
Right.
you're saying here.
And I think, like, when we see Nefarest right up, for example, that's, like, one of their central agonies, is that they did experience pleasure there, and they feel this guilt and whatever
Yes,
else.
and I actually had the opposite understanding when I was reading this section, which is that because Arcadia, for all of its nightmares and toxicity and abuse, at the same time is a place of wonder and, for some changelings, familiarity.
Yeah.
It's one of those things where the grass I don't want to say the grass is always greener on the other side, but it's easy to look back with rose-tinted glasses when you're dealing with things like, say, the current political environment of our world, and think, wouldn't it be nice to get away from that? And the Supreme Court wants you to realize when you're feeling despair in those moments that there is still something to hold you here that should keep you from walking back through a gate into Arcadia just to avoid this and re-embrace what you mistakenly think of as an escape.
Yeah. The key emotions that they have here are desire, especially for freedom, passion, which is messy but a reminder of being alive, and physical or spiritual hunger that pushes towards the future. So they're not living as though they're wounded or frightened, and that's how they hide from the others, is by celebrating their life. The twin dangers are overindulgence and total denial of the sort of wound that's still underneath. Maybe it's good, I think we're probably going to have to throw in a couple content notes throughout this, but be careful with how you manage addiction in your game, would be my suggestion here, because it does kind of tread on the edges of that, and that is a risk for Spring Court changelings in particular. So that's a theme to think about. We then get the Ardent Rule, which is your desires are your own, but with each word emphasized differently, kind of turning into a fivefold, almost like an SG, a guidance for life. And I like that. I like that it's kind of playing with the words to do different things. So basically what it boils down to is your desires are your own, don't kink shame. Your desires are your own, desire is internal. Your desires are your own, they exist and are valid. Your desires are your own, don't get kink shamed, and your desires are your own, be responsible. A little bit like the Code of Ananda that we get for the Cult of Ecstasy in Mage the Ascension. And there's a note on page 30 about not harming others that is super important to remember as a player and as a storyteller.
I think the core book did not show much nuance to the Supreme Court, if I recall correctly. And this does a lot to correct that, and then some.
Yeah.
The part that really sticks with me is that their passions, while they might include stereotypical hedonism, can also include anything from perfecting a tradecraft to becoming a master duelist. So the best fighter in the freehold may not be a summer general, but rather a spring courtier who loves nothing more than learning how to fight.
And that kind of leads into an interesting take on recruitment, where they often attract members from other courts. There's this nice little maxim on page 31 where they say, sorrow heals, anger dwindles, fear fades, only desire grows brighter, regardless of whether it is fed or starved. And the implication there is that changelings who freshly come back, they may be more likely to have this knee-jerk reaction to affiliate with the Court of Wrath, or the Court of Fear, or the Court of Sorrow, because they feel those things very keenly as they come through the thorns. But after a while, maybe they start to feel desire again and want to move away from those raw emotions they had before, and the Spring Court is kind of there to welcome them for that, which I thought was interesting.
I love them for that. I would not have thought of it that way, but I can see the logic behind it.
Yeah. And they work to foster humanity's passions too, and try and shift their values to make them less vulnerable to the others. Vibes of nourishing glamour. So structurally, they only seem unstructured, but really, Springface status is this constantly shifting formula of social capital, which is represented less by mantle and more by social-oriented role-playing, And especially things like duels of wits and gossip without using contracts are important factors. So given that flux, their titles tend to reflect roles rather than ranks. They tend to be invented on whims, but there are a few exceptions. So we get a whole list of those there.
I believe they're the only court that has this relatively loose and fluid system.
As I was going through the others, I was like, wait, why wasn't Spring more kind of developed about this? And then I kind of thought about it and was like, oh, yeah, all right, that makes sense. They would care less about this than probably all the others. The ones that do seem to stick that we get are the Vernal Sovereign, or some variation thereof, for a Spring Courtier who's currently running a freehold. I'm ashamed to say I don't actually know how to pronounce this, Serse, which is a status keeper and tastemaker who looks out for the best and brightest new recruits. The Verdant Advocate is a lawyer for those whose desires get the better of them. So actual, like, mortal lawyer could be a helpful thing to have in your pocket for the freehold. The Claviger for bodyguards and protectors. Sylvan Emissary is the ambassador to other courts, other freeholds, or even other supernaturals. An Archivist is kind of like a party planning savant, because their parties are legendary, admittedly.
We get to reference the magistrates of the Wax Mask, who
Yeah.
often find themselves in there, because this is actually a really important role, given that rituals have a often vaguely defined magical aspect to them in changing society, and it's really important for them to get them right.
Yeah. The Sage Escorts are courtesans and sex workers, and the Avant-Garde, with Guard, are trendsetters who shape desire in a cultural sense on a larger scale. Lastly, the Joyeux, who just want to inspire happiness in others. Good for them. It feels a little bit ham-fisted to be like, oh, the bodyguards have a passion to excel at martial arts, but
I think, as I said earlier, I think the idea of someone having a passion for that is cool, though. Two things. One, it feels a little weird for them to say in one section, titles aren't really that important to them. And then we get literally 3 pages of titles that they possess.
Yeah. We get freehold roles after that. Most of the titles that we just saw already have some kind of role embedded in them, but sort of more generally within a freehold, they kind of give options for what the Spring Courtiers might be doing to serve the larger community. We have horticulturalists, self-explanatory. We have counselors who are diplomatic and kind of soothe over social disagreements. There are enthusiastic ritualists. And here we have that spring magic connection again, which I'm going to come back to when we get to the autumn court, because I had a thought about that. There are also social coordinators and the occasional defenders. I would also think there should be somebody who's heavily involved in dealing with mortals around the freehold community. Like, that seems as though that would be a thing they'd be excellent at, but I don't think that's specifically called out here. So.
Do they give something like that for winter? I don't think they do.
No, I don't think it's anywhere.
Then it should have been in here. There is incidentally a note that oftentimes their own spring roles wind up being things that they extend as a role to the rest of the freehold, and some of these freehold roles are kind of duplicating what was written before. But still, it's a lot of good detail about what they have to offer.
Yep. We then get into the relations. Talks about how they're allied with summer when they're pointed towards the same goal, which can include competitions, but rivalry can turn into enmity. They're generally opposed to autumn, but they align on things like thrill-seeking and the carrot and stick of desire and fear. They see winter as a challenge to deal with, but they're always up for a challenge. And they're tolerant of the courtless while keeping the door open for them. Other Lost may not understand that a spring courtier's presented attitude doesn't necessarily have to do with their actual feelings about the person. It's just that they sort of have this performative way of dealing with others. Doesn't mean they're incapable of forming connections, but there's a difference between actual connections and the way they present those connections. Which I thought was an interesting touch.
I believe the way they describe the relationship with the Autumn Court is that normally they're at odds because your desire to do something is at odds with your fear of doing something, but that when they synergize, it's terrifying because people can easily flip between those two emotions, and if you have changelings playing into that, it is something distressingly powerful.
I'll also say that the examples they give here are horror movies, roller coasters, and BDSM scenes, and that's a much lighter tone than we get for the what they list in the Autumn Court section. So I'll get to
That
that.
actually sounds all very sweet, and I'm going to be very sad when we get to the Autumn Court part.
Yeah. For other supernaturals, they have mixed opinions of vampires, but it's best to avoid them. They are in awe at the passion of werebeasts, but ditto, best to avoid them. Especially, like, they are not into your social engineering stuff. Fascinated by mages, but ew, why did they seek Arcadia? Stop it. And the ghosts are passionate echoes reminding one to live life to the fullest. And speaking of passion, we then get the contracts of Verdant Spring, which is like passion, 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 passion. These contracts, we are told, are fickle. They have generous catches and sneaky drawbacks, great risk and reward. In order, they allow you to create more successfully on one endeavor, make their own passions more appealing to others, but you can't push a person into something they don't want to do, make a passionate combat roll, I guess, sway a crowd's desires, or refresh willpower pool by tapping into a virtue or vice. I think overall, I really like these, except, once again, content warnings are probably good around things like emotional manipulation, if you're going to be including this in your game. And some of the dramatic failures, yikes.
This is another example of where I feel like they talk up the benefits, but the reality doesn't live up to the hype. Because the benefits of, +4 to your next attack against somebody from giving up your action for the turn.
Right.
And the drawback is they get a bonus to hit you. And it's just, I love the concept. I just really feel like it misses the mark.
Yeah, I think this is going to be something that I echo for all of the contracts. I like the contracts in this book. They didn't grip me as much as the contracts in other books, I would say. Anyway, we close out with their entitlement, which is the bodhisattvas of the broken cage. They fight against conformity and habit, so banality, because they believe that desire inspires growth. This does not mean, however, that they are always nice or good. Examples include drug pushers, bullies, or tempters of the religious. Their means features reflect their focus on change and evolution by constantly shifting, up to and including gender, but they always have a golden glowing aura that can illuminate the darkness. So, of course, they tend to be things like aging beatniks and hipsters, and there's a note about their potential toxicity in that light. I did find interesting the note that they can't abide pledges which limit their freedom, so they do like the shortest possible vows, or ones that curtail their chasing of desire. They are perfectly willing to break pledges over that. But they also get a token that helps them inspire the less enlightened to break out of their own comfort zone. So overall, they're sort of like hyper spring. They refuse any kind of stagnation, which includes stability to some extent. It leaves me wondering, though, like, if all trends eventually end, isn't constantly chasing the next one also a form of stagnation? But the gender bending is fun. They have an allowance for responsibility. They're fine.
I too love the gender bending, and I wanted more of it. And the thing is, the book just kind of goes, it just kind of happens. I'm like, no, it's cool. It's cool. They should be able to control it and do whatever they want. It's awesome. Lean more heavily into it. I don't think the authors were thinking very heavily about it at the time, but God knows I was.
No.
I really, really should have realized I was an egg at that time when I was reading that passage the first time.
Entitlement. More like egg entitlement. Anything else on the spring court before we move on?
The pictures are really nice.
Yeah. I like spring, I do. I think this section was fine. It's not my favorite, but we'll get to that.
It adds a lot of detail, information, and nuance to the spring court. More so than I think I need. I don't think I will ever use all of those titles.
Yeah.
But then again, that probably goes for all of them. I'm glad it is here for people who want it.
Yes. So, moving on to the summer court. We open with a summer gang raiding a loyalist nest in Philadelphia, so naturally I'm in favor. But more generally, so the summer court is always so angry, but they turn that anger into justice and defense, punishing only the deserving, or so they claim. Sometimes they go just a little bit berserk, or vengeful, or autocratic, which they insist is necessary to keep the others at bay. Naturally, anger, or more properly, wrath, is their key emotion, flavored with courage and loyalty, if you want a positive angle, callousness and mercilessness, if you don't. Going into this, it was clear that each write-up was kind of structured slightly differently, so there's less on the emotions for Summer Court. But
yeah, I was expecting it to be the same for all of them, but
yeah,
no, it's not.
I guess there's maybe less to say about wrath. So recruitment for the court very much resembles army discourse. The Iron Spear wants you. It's kind of their line here. It's interesting how they will say any and all changelings belong in their ranks, whether they're frontline fighters or strategists or scouts or generals or sentries, all are welcome. And sometimes the recruiters are really pushy about it. So it's a very like total war mentality. And it's paired with, it says, this belief that anyone can be made into a soldier if you just flip the switch on their anger, especially right when they've clawed their way back through the thorns. Overall, I'll admit the mouthfeel of this, to borrow a Terry Robinson term, is why I'm not so into the summer court. It's creepy.
I do not like the summer courts vibe here. I don't want one of my 4 equal options to be
Exactly.
toxic map. I know they're very martial, but both the core book and especially Autumn Nightmares made it very clear that the militants are the ones that lean most heavily into this. I expected that they would say, yeah, Summer does risk running into this, and that way lies the militia, but here's what they are at their best. And I just don't see
Yeah. If they had made it a little bit more clear that the goal of pointing all of this out was to kind of show the flaws in the logic and the sort of paths of degeneration that people can tumble down as a result of that, I could have gone with that a little bit better. In the same way that, like, when people play Sabbat vampires, I want to see that highlighted, not just, oh yeah, this is the way it is. Let's go with that. I'm like, no, I want more commentary about that. Anyway. So even though we don't get as much about emotions as we did with Spring, we get the ideals that the court touts when they recruit. So there's brotherhood, combat if you want to learn how to fight, defense, both self and of each other, competition, the greater good in a utilitarian, pragmatic, and often amoral sense, and pure revenge. We also get the things they don't talk about, which are brutality, sacrifice that tends to be personal and uneven, and struggle. There's a little sidebar on ordeals that they sometimes put recruits to the test with.
Oh.
Yeah. These include leaving a prospective recruit in the hedge, publicly rejecting them, sending attackers to test them, or getting them to eliminate their fetch. I guess you could do like a League of Shadows game, Batman style, with this, but yeah, it doesn't really sound fun to try and join the Summer Court.
Did you think it was weird that their ruler is spontaneously chosen based on the subconscious will of the people?
I did. Yeah, so we get these notes about how they claim to be a meritocracy based on need, and it is total nonsense. So the monarch, the crown just kind of manifests because the local courtiers apparently believe they should be the leader. It is a nice visual to have like this diadem just kind of appearing. We get a few examples of what that might look like. But a military coup is also a popular way to gain control of the court. Yeah, I don't know. It bothers me that it is purely by instinct and not at all by deeds. Like, anyway, there's
Doesn't make sense.
current political climate, demagoguery is not something that I want to, following that, the esteem of mob and army section notes that status must be earned. The tests to earn it are more commonly mental or physical, like 3 days nonstop of chess or drinking poison. And this is separate from mantle, which is earned by actions directly serving the court, such as avenging a changeling or keeping vigil. There's a cool but very specific goblin fruit here called the Flower of 1 Hour. It's like a flower that blooms for an hour, and you brew it into a tea and drink it, and then you get swole.
Oh.
Then the Amity of Anger talks about goodwill, for which the Summer Court, you earn it by showing bravery, and bloodthirstiness on behalf of a Summer Courtier, almost always in battle. But votes or material support in a freehold context can work too. Having goodwill earns you the right to an opinion in their battle plans, but it is seldom earned. So
I think that contradicts what we were getting from the Spring Court with their surprising sections about, yeah, we've got like battle-hardened warriors. It just seems like, maybe the sections were written separately.
Yeah. Oh, I assume each of the authors, well, there were 5 authors, but I assume each court was done by a different person.
That would make sense.
Yeah. Lastly, Titles in Crimson lists a number of the common ones. Without mantle, you can be a Sentry of Summer's Vigil, who are just guards, or at least imposing figures who people think will be guards. A Mule Squire, who gets the grunt work, or a Dust Grunt / Mud Grunt, a basic foot soldier. As you start gaining mantle, at Mantle 2, you can be a Constable of Califaction, who acts like a sheriff, in theory for Summer Court only, but they often kind of go beyond their jurisdiction within a freehold, kind of like that opening story we saw. Or you can be a Man-at-Arms, who are knights that are better trained than the grunts. Getting to Mantle 3, you might become a Sun's Tongue diplomat, or an arrayer of distant thunder who canvasses support and drafts volunteers for war efforts in a freehold. Mantle 4 has the Hunter of the Longest Day, who's a knight-turned-tracker of individual threats. They tend not to fight fair, and they collect trophies on the way. Or you can be an Iron Adjutant, who is the ruler's right hand. Mantle 5, the Red Victor is an epic champion who serves as the court's living emblem, and the Roth General Calescence is the military leader. Not always the same as the monarch, kind of an echo of the Shogun Emperor distinction in Japan. And then there's also the Sun Shadow, which is the rare ally with enough court goodwill. Court goodwill 4, who earns considerable respect.
I really like the picture that's on the same page as Sun Shadow of the person stretching out their arm while holding a spear back in their long hair pulled back like powerful flames. While some in the background
Very nice
is,
legs.
I think, applauding. Oh yeah, very nice legs. Look at those heels. Just
all the
rock.
way down to the ground.
Ooh, boy.
Yeah. So then roles within the freehold more generally. Obviously, they're the ones who often have the most physical strength. They do both offense and defense. I question whether they truly offer a safe harbor, but they claim to, at least. They deal with violent threats, and they reinforce their feeling of sanctity around that notion of, I guess, preservation and safety with their celebrations. And they must hold celebrations, else they will lose their mantle and status.
Yeah, that seems harsh.
It does, but the celebrations are nice. I always enjoy when you kind of get these details about, events and stuff. Although, well, I say nice. The events are not themselves necessarily nice.
Before we get there, I wanted to say real quick that they describe the Summer Court as often acting as both a freehold's defense and offense and being a blunt instrument, which feels weird to me for a group that I think would be more precise. Again, this feels like language that should have gone into the militant vibes.
Yeah, the line is very fine. And the entitlement that we had about the border Margraves or whatever it was, it's kind of all overlapping. But the celebrations that they have the Shikar Royal Hunt on June 21st, where they hunt down a target who, hopefully, the whole freehold can support that this is somebody who needs to be hunted down. Not necessarily the case. The Midsummer's Yield on July 20th, which is like half party, half funeral. The Feast of Strength on August 31st, which is food and games. And July at Christmas, December 24th, a raucous party with a mystical benefit. I also like these because it gives you a precipitating event to build a story around. So any of these would be a good opening scene for a session.
Yeah, these are good.
With their relations, they think winter are cowards lost in their sorrow, but they will nevertheless defend their right to do so, or to be so, I guess. Spring are just children, and their passion needs direction, and partying has to be earned. Soldiers. Autumn are scary, so they get awe, but also revulsion and suspicion. And among the other lost, only bridge burners really get some leeway. Like, they don't really like militants, or certainly not loyalists. There's only a paragraph each on mortals, who most summer consider themselves secondary defenders of the innocent, and monsters, other supernaturals just generally. They have zero tolerance for threats, and they will even help human hunters against one of those. So not really very deep outside of even the court write-ups aren't very.
No, although it is pretty funny to think of a vampire being hunted by a mortal with just one weird buddy, and they're like,
yeah,
who's this person? And then the summer courtier erupts into sunlight.
And they might do so with the Contracts of Punishing Summer. So these are tools of war, interestingly modified based on season and time of day, which is kind of neat. In order, they allow you to heat up a small item, stand still and radiate sunlight, not enough to really harm vampires, but can frenzy them. Make a ring of flaming thorns around a target, afflict a target with a sunstroke curse, and blast a large area with summer heat or summer storm effects. Pretty good overall, but kind of fanciful. I think the first one is maybe my favorite because you can kind of use it cleverly, like get someone to drop that gun or, I don't know, melt a lock or something.
I like Scorched Earth just for how absolutely terrifying it is once the effect goes off. Since
it's just so extra.
It does exactly what it says. And speaking of extra, I love that person who's doing Battle Bright and just holding out his arm in front of someone else and like, ah!
Beautiful. Also, rocking that corset pant combination number.
Oh god, yes. Look, there's a lot of great art in this book.
So then, lastly, we have the Entitlement is the Hound Tribunal that goes around only during the dog days of summer to punish those they claim are enemies of the freehold, especially those who threaten their monarch. They are ostensibly secret, so recruits are invited on the basis of some notable task and to fill a need. The rest of the year, they're just kind of strongly summer-mantled zealots who support the order. A given monarch's attitude towards them varies depending on that monarch's comfort with the order's methods. The concept suggestions that we get for them include axeman, clandestine hangman, clergyman, darkling assassin, ex-cop, fairest liaison to the monarch, king's right-hand man, secret judge, and talented abductor. Not really sure about that last one.
That last one sounds weird.
But they get a bonus to lying about themselves, and they get a contract signed in blood pledge with which they can banish traitors. So, Summer Court, they're a whole mood. I mean, all of these are whole moods, but...
I do have a funny thought of the Hound Tribunal being like, you have to swear this pledge, you're going to leave. Person be
well,
like,
if it's swear or die, that's...
that. Okay, good point.
I do want to give a little bit of a content warning for the Autumn Court. There's a few points in this when I'm going to be like, what were they thinking? But there's also a few points where I was like, I have the best idea. So take note.
I'm trying to recall both of them, but please go on. I'm sure it'll come to me soon.
So we open with this meditation on the nature of fear and feasting. Lots of gardening and harvesting imagery, saying fear of the coming winter, I guess, empowers the harvest. The other emotions, they say, are simple to understand, but fear takes a more nuanced and patient examination to figure out. Honestly, it feels a little bit forced to me, like they kept saying these things, and I kept thinking of counterexamples, but whatever. Fear is easy for the courtiers to lose themselves in. They can become serial killers or seek rarefied and new varieties of fear. But the emotion also, they think it inspires people in general because it denies catharsis and creates urgency for desire, anger, and sorrow. They bring up the carrot and stick approach again that we saw in spring, where you balance scaring enemies with keeping freeholds in line. For the lost themselves are filled with fears. And I think that kind of lends itself towards more practical applications of how you would kind of make the Autumn Court's ethos visible in a game. Their recruitment centers on the philosophy of magic, turn the gentry's powers against them, but show those powers respect, and the philosophy of fear, return his own fears outward. Some victims become victimizers, others learn to overcome and master their suffering. They usually don't go in for lost who think they're fearless, or they at least try to break them of that notion. There's a sidebar on bogeymen, which points to how changing up the fears that they experience and work with throws off the keepers and keeps things fresh. So like a keeper might think, oh, they've terrorized you in this one particular way, and they come and find you and you're like, oh no, I have a totally different terror that I'm working with these days. Come back to me last year. So the notion that I had about magic in particular, because Rites of Spring was the magic book, and I really liked the presentation of magic as a manifestation of desire being a spring thing. At the same time, parallel to things like Dark Ages Fae, here they're leaning more into the Autumn Court being the magic-associated one. So different reasons, like you're leveraging that fear of the power you wield in order to co-opt it and beat it. And it's not just out of curiosity, or curiosity tinged with fear might be appropriate, but it's certainly not the desire to effect change in the world. I put a thing in my notes where I said, spring is right-hand magic, autumn is left-hand magic. And I think that dichotomy works, for me at least.
The part with spring being so heavily into magic surprised me because this is not a theme that I think continues into 2nd edition. They lean very heavily into the idea that autumn are the sorcerers in general.
Yeah.
But I actually really like the idea that spring masters magic because it helps them live in this world and achieve what they want.
Yeah. The idea of what magic should be to the lost, I can understand them saying, handle with care is the primary thing. It should not be wonder and amazingness and creation like you would get with spring. So that transition, I understand why they did it, but I think there's room for both. Anyway, so then we move on into the court structure, which we're told is steeped in occult wisdom and fear. And there's a couple common strategies for how the monarchs and the court as a whole sort of conduct themselves. So first we have rule by fear, obviously. This is like beyond Machiavelli. Fear is used as a means to an end as well as for its own pleasure. It is derived from gathering information from spies, from oniromancy, using secret police, threats and backstabbing. Generally not fun if you have a rule by fear autumn court in power.
It surprised me because I felt why their examples of how the monarchs rule feel more like the monarchs are doing to their court what their court's supposed to be doing to other people, And it didn't make sense to me that they would organize like this unless they were losing the thread of what they're doing.
I don't know. I think it's a very much do as I do, lead by example kind of thing.
Okay.
That was sort of I think internally the Autumn courtiers would kind of roll with it, and everybody else in the Freehold would be like, oh no, Autumn's about to take power again. This is contrasted with my favorite of the three, Thrones of the Wise, where you have a sorcerer monarch, and that relies more on the reputation of secret lore and wizardry, much pomp and ritual, often restricting access to themselves and using decoys and stuff to create that. And then we have Palace of Dust, which is more the court in general. It conceals itself entirely within a freehold to propagate unease, or it partially conceals itself and works through intermediates. And I liked that second angle because it made me think of a more monastic autumn court. Like, they kind of seclude themselves, but you can meet them at the door once a week to exchange information or whatever. You're just never entirely sure what's going on behind closed doors.
Yeah, none of them click with me, but hey, I'm glad the fact they clicked with you shows that there is something to be said for these.
This was my favorite one. This section generated the most ideas in me. That's what I'm going with. The status section is kind of a wall of text, but swearing honest fealty is usually enough to join because they want to keep their numbers up. Their mantles tend to strengthen through steady service and or genius with little middle ground. And one must become fear to get to the top. I was sort of reading the end of this page 70 like in Batman voice in my head. Swear to me. Anyway, those who merely seek the court's goodwill need only show that they're useful to Autumn one way or another. That can be ordeals that propagate fear, bribes of lore, or just doing tasks to further the court's goals. And luckily, spontaneous acts can be recognized just as much as intentional ones. That bit, as an aside, this made me think about, I know you've defended Lost more than I have as a game where you can have a strong and trusting, even familial community of changelings. And I'm always like, I know the core book at least tries to set that tone, but then since then I'm like, are they that trusting? Are they that familial? And I think this bit right here actually does make that happen, because as a storyteller, you have the option to set the tone of goodwill. You can give that merit as a tangible reward for helping an NPC. So good, go do that. Alternatively, you can just have an Ashen Hunt to get goodwill, but I like the idea of it being more in the moment, because that encourages players, I would think, to be kinder, to be good Samaritans, you know?
It's a good point. Looking for reasons to earn court goodwill both gives a way to keep characters closer together, and also a fun motivation for players to engage with courts outside of their own, which is always fun.
Yeah. And that being said, you can also lose favor if you start dispelling fear in others and stuff. And if you leave the court, they're kind of like annoyed, but they don't really care that much. I flesh-crawlingly love the bit about rumors of Autumn assassinating those it gives goodwill to as their ultimate contribution to fear. Storytellers, discuss this beforehand. Discuss how much duplicity you want to have in your game with Session 0. But yeah. Then the titles. Again, these are not universal, but we get them anyway. There's the Twilight Page, who instructs the newbies to the court. The Paladin of Shadows, who's basically a brute squad. Rangers, who allow hedge crossover, because they're kind of the explorers. The Legate of Mists is a diplomat par excellence. And the Fool of First Frost, who's basically a dark stand-up comedian. And those are all, regardless of mantle, as you start ratcheting up mantle dots, you can get to the Lord and Lady Scrivener, who's the record keeper, and the Ghoul for a heinous assassin type. Mantle 3 has Witch of the Bitter Wind, occult experts. Mantle 4 is the Magister of Nightmares, who prepares the Ashen Hunts, and Ashen Notary, who keeps track of all pledges. And then for the rare true allies who have court goodwill, there's the Dread Esquire. I think for like most of these, I had characters kind of bloom fully formed in my head. So I did like these, even though I find titles kind of less than necessary. Within a freehold, I think we saw before this note that they tend to be the most pigeonholed as like, oh, well, obviously they're going to be our spies and assassins. But other options we have include counselors, super helpful for games where clarity erodes quickly. Executioners, because the Lost don't do imprisonment. Viziers, but only the annoyingly mysterious kind. Seers, with some charlatans mixed in. The quaintly harvest concept connected hedge guides and hedge farmers. The self-explanatory grave tenders. An historian, because autumn is the season of wisdom for reasons. and bounty hunters, which are, again, quaintly harvest-centered. We also have jailers because, oh, no, actually, they do imprisonment, so there's that. Sorcerers, and, again, harvest-themed provisioners. There's a lot here. There's some clear overlap between certain titles and certain roles. But I did find most of these to be like more nuanced and with more ideas than Spring and Summer's were. Spring and Summer, a lot of the titles were just kind of like cheeky descriptions. Here it's like I have actual hooks that I can hang a story on. So relationally, besides being the magic experts, we have a lot here to consider with their opinions. Like a lot more than the Summer Court. Like each of the other courts gets several paragraphs here. Spring, they rarely work with because fear opposes desire in relation to hope, which is an intriguing concept. I dig alliances between them in theory, but again, content warning compared with what we saw in the Spring section. They frame that as creating a freehold climate that can be like an abusive relationship, and then immediately follow that with the note that they work best together when they're dealing with mortals. I'm like, yeah, that's a hard nope. I do not need a game about
That's
that.
a pretty fucked up thing for them to do. So
Yeah.
certainly one of the reasons that safety tools were created. I think there's something to be said for the fact that, as we discussed earlier with the Summer Court, especially, the Fae sometimes get so wrapped up in their emotions that it feeds into something awful. And I could see a story that involves at least some Spring and Autumn courtiers getting together to do something like that. And the adventure may very well be about, hey, so these people are doing this, and that's not right, so we're going to stop it.
Yeah. Well, and speaking of Summer, the conjoinment that they have there, Autumn regards Summer well for their directness and the fear they create with their violence. Obviously, they make war together because wrath and fear are a potent combination.
Mm-hmm.
But again, the framing of it, they say, I quote, it's a sort of ghoulish symbiosis that they position in war-torn third world countries.
What the?
Not into this.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is the one part. Overall, this is my favorite section, except this part. Winter they feel most aligned with in terms of wisdom and style. The caution Winter expresses is sometimes annoying, but they complement each other well, especially when facing the gentry. And naturally, their occult ties mean they know the other supernaturals well. They appreciate the fear vampires create, but use extreme care with them. Ditto werewolves, about whom they know less. Definitely avoid mages. But they are fascinated by the prospect of Prometheans, they're polite to ghosts, and they seek to document all of the weirder stuff. So I at least got the sense that there was depth of thought in here. A lot of it is useful, but a lot of it is also very handled with care, like all of those relational bits, I would say.
Yeah, you said pretty much everything I've had to say about it so far. Spellbound Autumn's next, though.
Yes, the contracts of Spellbound Autumn. These call on Autumn's affinity for sorcery, which is a little bit redundant because it's magic, but alright. In order, they allow you to detect the supernatural, talk to ghosts, divine the purpose of a token or other power object from whichever game, command hobgoblins or gentry minions, and circumvent a pledge sanction, which is a nice big chunky level 5, I would say.
Yeah, I think all of these are good. They play directly into the idea of them being sorcerers by expanding what they can do and making it much easier for them to do other things that often interact with the weird or corners of the world that nobody else does. So, overall, I like Spellbound Autumn.
Level 3, I think, is my favorite because I like those object analysis scenes. And the final thing is the Entitlements, the Magi of the Gilded Thorn. Kind of the anti-Scarecrow ministry, or maybe the other side of the coin. They go into the hedge to collect lore and also conquer their fear of it, which many lost feel is not a great idea, and indeed many of the Magi go frequently missing. But overall, they're kind of like these weird woodsman wizards, and I love them. Lots of hedge-spun raiment, and they start getting thorns poking out of their mane that are like dripping blood, which is ick, but yes. Pretty solitary, but not hermits. They are brave and curious, and their privilege protects them from the capital T thorns.
Yes, enables them to wander longer and with less fear of clarity degeneration, which can be a big deal if you're going to spend a lot of your time in the hedge.
Last but not least, the Winter Court. So we start with a commentary that, yes, others call them cowards, because they're not front and center or seeking glory. They espouse caution, stealth, and humility, and it's not the most small g glamorous thing. They also have some selfishness, because each of them looks out for themselves, and they're kind of cold, wintry, because Having that demeanor protects them both from the desire that attracts the gentry, in their opinion, and also from the sorrow that defines them. So that dispassion, they wear it like armor, I guess. It's a court for lost who value stark simplicity over dangerous passions or secrecy and vigilance.
I've always thought of them as the court that helps you establish the foundations of a mortal life before you do anything else. Maybe you get back and your first thought is, oh, I'm going to use all my awesome magic to do everything. And then they drop by to say, okay, but you need some place to sleep every night that isn't in the middle of the hedge.
And I'll square that circle by saying those decisions need to be made without emotion, so it fits. The guiding principles that we get here, they form the ice law, which is a code like the Seelie code or the Unseelie code.
I was not expecting the ice law. The ice law through me, I forgot this existed.
Yeah. So parts of it are flexible depending on freehold, other parts are more universal, and that latter piece is divided into, first, let every court know its function, which is basically everyone mind your own damn business. They would rather withdraw than confront when courts kind of cross the lines and get into business that isn't theirs. And sometimes that leads to the winter court kind of being separatist. They feel that mutual respect keeps the court strong and they want people to stay in their lanes as much as possible. Then hide your love and hate. Freedom, they feel, comes from mastering passions because the true Fae embody the evil of lack of restraint. They do things like courtly love and they avoid rivalries instead of doing like grand passionate romance or this sort of cycle of offense driven by, envy and bitterness. There is a sidebar on page 89 that points to the court's tales on courtship and how a lot of them sort of talk about the tragedy when passion overtakes restraint, but they get that it's hard to control love, so they'll forgive a minor slip up. It's like, all right, you kiss them in the spur of the moment this one time. We'll accept that.
I'm much more enjoying your explanation of it than I am when I read it myself. My eyes were glazing over by the point I got to the ice law, but it makes this sound so sweet. Please continue.
The next one, I think, is probably the most interesting, which is prepare your farewells. You have to always be ready to move on, even to a new life. Live simply with few possessions. Have an emergency kit and an escape plan, and ideally the new identity merit. The court will help you reestablish yourself, but that story of needing to up and run and start somewhere else, I think, is a really potent either story or backstory, depending on the situation.
It's certainly something that I've valued. I've always liked the Winter Court as the ones that have a plan in place for when the Fae do find you, when you mess up badly and you need somewhere to go. They're the ones who can take care of you.
A good plan, at least. I think the others have plans, they're just not necessarily good ones. The last one is keep the people lost to every outsider. This is their survival through secrecy thing, including from mortals, which they call the second great sorrow. Oof. You have to abandon your old life and identity. If you must confront your fetch, be an assassin. Just deal with them and don't get caught. Avoid other supernaturals if possible. Lie if you can't. There's a sidebar connected to this which discusses a network of winter cottage safe houses they maintain. These have benefits tied to mantle and court status, which I'll get below. They can form the basis for new hollows.
The thing I feel is missing from this is the extent of disconnect they want from the mortal life feels at odds with Changeling's needs. And I know that that is covered by a spring ethos, but I've always felt that winter wants you to be very grounded in the mortal world, just in a constrained way that is different from spring, in the same way that spring's interest in magic is different from autumn.
I think they would like every changeling to have an apartment that no other changeling knows about, where they don't talk to their neighbors, they just collect their mail and keep their head down, and that's like safety. Because then getting into the section on recruitment is easy. Run and hide. If you do that, you're the kind of changeling Winter Court's into. They will teach you how to do it better because they will find you. You have the right idea, but you're bad at hiding. But if you reject their first attempt to help you keep a low profile, they won't try again. So they're not going to put out their necks for you. It takes time to earn their trust. There is a sidebar here on Morning Count, a code register they use that I desperately want more about. Reminds me of like Polari. So then, for acceptance, there's the Precious Crystal Rite, which is a test of discretion. I really enjoyed this, I will say. They tell you a fake secret, and you pass the test if you either keep it or tell only the subject of the secret. You fail the test if you start spreading it around to other people or dismiss it entirely. Tell the Winter Courtier, no, that's not true. So
I thought it was interesting too. I like when they come up with these creative little things that the courts do like that.
yeah. And it does feel like there's some overlap with Autumn here. They talk about them being the elder sibling courts or whatever. And it is this thing about, like, rather than approaching the fearful changelings to teach them how to overcome it and use it, they instead teach the fearful changelings how to slip out the back door in a different direction. Both are giving me heavy Slua vibes, but yeah, fundamentally they value subtlety more than spring and summer. And I think that's the connection. Court structure. So, status is a matter of trust, based on which the court rations the knowledge it shares and the favors it gives. You prove your worth by surviving and helping others without hope of reward, because they have a cold pragmatism. There's also a taboo against boasting, so you kind of need a mentor to help promote you. This ends up creating a kind of cell structure, as they put it. And I was thinking about, like, different ways to present that. I think the three that I could see this working as are, like, aristocratic families, academia, or the mob. And I'd be happy with any of those.
Huh.
So
I hadn't considered that. The cell structure was another thing that I didn't like, but I understand why it's here, because, again, I'll be honest, I think the thing I was missing is that they talk about the Autumn Courtiers having assassins, and I've always thought of that as being the Winter Courts thing. We're the ones who quietly take care of problems, and I just wanted to see a lot of that in here.
I think that what you just said kind of points to the distinction, where I can see Autumn Assassins being a more about, I don't know, results-based. Like, they want to create the fear of sudden death, and they want to make clear to changelings that nobody is safe, whereas Winter is like, no, we just need to resolve this problem once and for all so we can all get on with our lives. Something like that.
I see. That makes sense, but am I missing something? Because I don't think they really talk about that very much with the
No,
Winter
they
Court.
don't.
Okay, then.
No, that's purely me riffing on my interpretation. Anyway, once you prove your fidelity to the Winter Court, it's pretty easy to advance. You dig up secrets, you help others hide, you stay quiet. There's a sidebar on their two punishments for bad behavior, which are ostracism and murder. Damn. Anyway, there is a nifty variation here, though, compared with the other courts, where as you advance in Mantle, it's tied to lores that you get access to. So it presages V5's lore sheets in a way. It's like a set of resources and policies you gain access to bit by bit, plus a title. Although they're more about survival than politics, so the title isn't that important. Mantle alone won't suffice, though. You also need the court to appreciate your deeds. In order, these are the Flowing Pages, who are useful but disposable couriers and scouts. They get to learn the network of winter cottages and the basics of the morning count. Level 2, Squires of the Frost, get info on security policies and the pecking order. They get justification for more merits because they get access to, like, contacts and lore and whatnot. Then the Iceclad Amagers are freehold leaders often. It says that, like, the Winter Court in a freehold, they're usually, like, the highest visible ones. They deal with the supernaturals and with hollows that the court maintains. They have kind of a big picture view. And then level 4 is where they start kind of getting more secluded. The Onyx Thanes, who study mystical stuff in depth. They manage tokens, they get hedge maps, they serve as judges in a lot of cases for the Winter Court's business. And then finally, the level 5 Unbidden Lords. They keep the great mysteries and deepest secrets. Generally, they are anonymous leaders. And there's a really cool sidebar on the immutable signs, which are marks that they use to convey their authenticity to people who otherwise have never seen them or heard them before. And then we get a few unranked titles separate from that.
It is just so much that they have.
Yeah.
I don't even remember what the immutable signs do.
Oh, it's like a handshake or a seal on a document or whatever, so you can, like, it's like an authentication mark, which they also then give options for how it can still be worked around, which kind of undercuts the purpose, but I dig it. We get a few unranked titles separate from that. There's an interesting note here that they think entitlements often revolve around obsession, not function. I'm like, it's an interesting contrast to make. I don't know if I
don't buy it, because most of the entitlements I can think of, they have a hyper-specific version of a function that already exists inside of the courts.
Yeah. But I like that as being a Winter Court opinion floating around. It doesn't necessarily jive with the entitlements we saw that are winter specific, but I don't know. It was an interesting note. Regardless, we get the Archer of the Lonely March, which is an expert scout. My favorite, DJ Utsal, as an archetypal character on Radio Free Fae that anyone can inhabit. Just this identity that anybody takes on in the moment.
Was not expecting DJ to be one of the roles for the court all about secrecy and hiding and keeping a low profile.
But that's the whole thing with like Radio Free Fae. You know. There's also the Lord of the Inhospitable Chamber for the court's chief interrogators, and Sun Banishers for those who destroy evidence. I think DJ Utsal had like more potential than almost all of the other titles put together. But I like the idea of the lore advancement as well.
Would you play DJ Utsal?
Absolutely. As for freehold roles, being notoriously selfish and deceptive, and being benign liars who hate making promises, and pragmatists who don't hold grudges, Winter Court tends to be seen as benevolent spies for hire, who prioritize themselves. They make good scouts and counselors, but they are not natural leaders. It's really in Radio Free Fae where the more sociable, carefree types end up, and then they have their winter market, which is where they interact more smoothly with the other courts. What happens at the market stays at the market.
I thought the winter market was a fun idea.
Yeah. And it's in contrast with their more private rituals, which are generally sober and quiet. The other public rituals that we get notes on here are the Embers to Ashes bonfire after the first heavy snow, where they burn symbols of secrets and or their human life, and the Nameless Mourning funeral pyre, where they burn an effigy in honor of lost slain by the gentry. We then get notes on their relations. They treat the other courts with respect, and again, expect them to stay in their lane. There's a nice sort of summary for each one here, where it says, spring is for society, summer for war, autumn for magic, courtless for watching. I'm like, oh, it's a nice little
watching
twist at the end there. It's succinct and sensible. They take the lead from others in terms of their expertise. Like, if they're going to war, they say, we're going to let Summer handle this. Summer, give us a good idea of what to do, and we will do it.
They are quite chill.
Yeah, hey. And there's, in terms of the occult with winter versus autumn, winter in the glance, autumn in the chance is the maxim. So winter will know what they're looking at and categorize it, and then they will point you towards autumn if you want in-depth analysis, because it's like, that's their business. With other supernaturals, as a result, they keep their distance so as not to expose the lost. And again, they will lie about their nature if necessary when dealing with them. And I love that each court is kind of given a supernatural to deal with. So they're like, let Spring deal with vampires and play on their self-interest. Let Summer deal with werewolves because they are terrifying fuzzy chainsaws. And let Autumn deal with magi because occult expertise is their thing.
And did they say what they themselves want to deal the most with? I would have guessed ghosts.
You'd think, but it doesn't really specify.
You know what? No, actually, I would want to say ghosts. Prometheans. Yeah, Prometheans would make more sense, because if there's somebody who understands the idea of sorrow, it's going to be those folks.
Lastly, second to lastly, we get the contracts of the sorrow-frozen heart. They are subtle, and there are notes that it conflicts with regaining willpower from virtue, and I feel like that's a fairly steep drawback to have as an overall thing for your contract. Like, I think it's if you use the contracts, you can't regain willpower from your virtue for a period of time, and vice versa.
If a changeling satisfies a virtue while using one of these contracts, the player can refuse to refresh his character's willpower. If he does not, the contract's benefit end immediately.
Yeah. Ugh. I'm not into the idea of like immediately nerfing a contract before we even get to the powers. But
it's circumstantial that it would come up at all, but I don't think the numbness that we get from this necessarily conflates with ignoring virtues.
Yeah, exactly. And like, what if your virtue is something that plays in very nicely to sorrow, like forgiveness?
Temperance.
Yeah. In any case, the contracts allow you to, in order, numb physical pain or discomfort, ward off fear, ignore damage, attack with icy dispassion, or share levels 1, 2, or 3 with another. And that last one, again, there's a lot of bumpers on it. I ultimately couldn't decide whether it was good or bad and for whom. I think they also changed a contract name in here somewhere because they kept referring to one that is not on the list.
Oh, I did not notice that. I did think that saying you can just share your contract with other people as the ultimate power was It feels like what you do when you can't figure out what else you'd put
Yeah.
in there. It just sort of lacks the amazing thing of, I'll just break an oath, or everything around me is dead.
Yep. Finally, we get the Knighthood of Utmost Silence entitlement. This is a group that helps changelings escape without a trace, set up new identities, and fend off enemies.
Which
Kind
I
of like the
love.
rest of Wintercourt's supposed to do, but I guess they're all supposed to.
Yeah. Again, despite what the book says about obsession, they're very clearly leaning into a specific function.
Yeah. They are secretive even for Winter. Shifts in technology mean that they now recruit hackers, counterfeiters, etc., as well as fugitives, con artists, etc. But despite their overall martial prowess, they are not assassins. They generally work solo, but they are organized by the Quiet Marshal, and those who quit the order are shunned. They decide who they help. They don't really do it for a fee or out of blanket altruism, thus they aren't very trusted. Interesting story note. A few indicators: they arm themselves with blades, they wear dark, inconspicuous garb, and most importantly, slash creepily maybe, their means are mouthless. Either actually mouthless or just kind of obscured with hedge-spun garb or whatever.
I'll be honest, I'm not a fan of the way they drew the mouthlessness of this one, where it just looks like he put way, way too much shaving cream around his face.
I mean, that could be his meme. Maybe that's just how it expresses itself.
It could be.
Why not?
It was a choice to make him look like that.
Or he's rabid.
No.
Their privilege is the Shadow Kiss, which they give a kiss of glamour to a recipient and make them harder to track for a day, and then they can kind of keep renewing that. Basically gives them arcane in mage terms.
Yeah, I can dig that.
Yeah, useful. So just overall notes on this chapter, like I said, my favorite is autumn because it gave me the most ideas. I really wanted to like spring's right up more because I like spring, but I just don't think it gave me as much as I wanted. But I am kind of digging for things to complain about because overall these were really good. I think the contracts were fun, but the least interesting part. I loved the deep dive into the ethos of each court and how it interacts with the others, both generally and in the context of the specific freehold. That is a hugely useful piece that was missing. The last step is to actualize that in how the characters interact. And overall, I think there are enough tools to do that here on a character level. You can use rituals and events, or focus on freehold roles, or the assumptions one court makes about another. Those are all strategies a storyteller can work with to get players to play up this identity and think about how they will bring all of this to life in their characters. Things like the rumors for the entitlements, they give you story hooks. There's the examples that are thrown in throughout about, well, this is a general case, but here's this specific one in this specific city. But I'd prefer not to rely on those as crystallizations of the courts as a whole, because they're not complex enough. I want depth when I'm thinking about courts. So that's my overall assessment.
I had the opposite vibe from you. I was immediately captivated by the in-depth treatment of the spring court and expanding them beyond the obvious, and then turned off by the toxic masculinity of summer and just had a difficult time engaging with autumn, despite the fact that I love the vibe of autumn in general.
Oh no.
And winter, which just did a lot of stuff that I wasn't expecting it to do and wasn't especially interested in. I can see why you're excited about it, and I wish I shared that amount of enthusiasm.
Well, I'm going to hazard that maybe part of it is because you have run and played a lot more Changeling the Lost than I have. And so you have that experience to contrast this with, whereas I'm mainly looking at it in the context of what have we seen in first edition so far. To me, this fills a major gap in the content, and whether or not that actually plays out well at the table, at any given table, that's a separate kind of thing to think about. So, I mean, I am excited to see the depth. That doesn't necessarily mean I'm raring to play a summer court either.
Okay, I see what you mean.
But also, I mean, just because it generated ideas also doesn't mean I'm in favor of those ideas necessarily. And I agree with you about the treatment of summer in particular.
So would you say then that you're more inspired on how you would play these courts after reading this section?
I think so. I don't think it makes me more or less likely to play the ones that I already was looking at.
Which one is your favorite?
I mean, spring and autumn, but for different reasons. I think spring is my favorite. Autumn is the one that I find most complex. that sense, I think, was heightened by this read through.
I want to say Autumn's my favorite, but I think I would wind up going Spring because, for all of my love of creepiness, I think that there's something. You know what? I can capture that by just being a Spring Darkling. And
Huzzah!
perfect. There we go. Got it. Chapter 3, we're going to be discussing Noble and Eldritch orders, which
Yes.
add some extra dimension. First, we have our introductory story, displaying a gentleman wearing some robes and emblems, kneeling within a circle, his hand clasped around a sword's blade that has drawn a significant amount of blood from him. The handle of it held by a stern-looking woman with some kind of cool hair now that I look at how it
Yeah.
angles down at the bottom. And in the background of the scene, we see cloaked and hooded figures staring at all of it, giving the strong impression of a secret society initiation, which, in fact, that is exactly what it happens to be. The story is brief, but nicely captures the vibe of what joining one might feel like to somebody in the moment.
I don't really even call it a story. It's more just this little moment of the oath swearing because we don't really get much context or anything. But to your point about, so yeah, we are talking about noble and eldritch orders. I can't remember if we've actually seen an eldritch order yet. I think we might have seen one, but really the distinction, I think all we have is just they're for more powerful changelings. They deal with more powerful stuff, and that seems to be like the only real distinction. So, yeah.
Yes, an Eldritch Order is an entitlement of particular strength and age bound by stronger magic and reaching farther beyond the bounds of simple politics. They have more stringent requirements for admission, accepting only those who are growing legends themselves, and they confer greater privileges as well. We've seen this concept in previous books that more powerful orders require more requirements to get in, but this is the first time they're outright categorically meant for extremely powerful or experienced changelings.
Yeah. And we only get 2 in here, so. There's also, I was kind of thinking, like, because all of these entitlements, or most of these, are described as, oh, it's rather small. So on the one hand, you kind of have the freedom to leave them out of your game or introduce them in your game and have leeway to say either it's known or unknown, because any given freehold might not even have encountered someone from one of these entitlements. It's like if you only have 20 changelings in your entitlement and they're scattered around the country or whatever, it's anyone's guess whether a given freehold will have knowledge of them. So I would say don't treat all of these as like, of course, everyone knows what the Ancient and Accepted Order of Bridge Masons is all about. Like, these are corners of the setting which technically are optional.
Yes, they add a lot of flavor and you should consider including them, but don't feel compelled to, or obsess over whether your character knows every one of them. They might not even exist in your game.
Yeah. The other thing is, as a storyteller, like if you introduce one of these characters into your game, don't let the player say, well, I know all about them. It's like, well, no, your character might not, because you might not have encountered them. So you have to define how known an entitlement is to the player's characters.
Fair, and also easy to adjudicate, since the amount of detail we get on any of them gives a pretty good impression of how secretive or populous any of them might be.
We're short on time, so we're going to do rapid fire entitlements. So let's dive in. So the Ancient and Accepted Order of Bridge Masons dates back to the Dark Ages. They made bridges in the hedge for the gentry, but they built a bridge to freedom, and now they have this architecture and sculpture skill. They are autumn affiliated and support common rights. They kind of look like construction workers, and their means become more muscly, with lots of
big hands too, I think.
Big hands, and lots of like traditional Masonic stuff, like the initiation and secret handshakes. And their privilege is the weird building process, where they can build large constructions. It's a fancy method, but I think they're still just building mundane buildings, right? It's not like they're building magical palaces.
This was a problem I had with them. The book builds up that weird building is both a secret and nowadays seen as a refined art, which is no longer necessary, but a sign of status if you can get it done. Yet when you get to the actual privilege, it's just...
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of cool that you can whistle a building together, but...
It's just a building.
Yeah, I mean, cool. You're like a login from
Yeah.
dreaming. I was expecting a little more. I would love to tell you about the Barony of the Lesser Ones, who are in charge of negotiating with, investigating, and even hunting hobgoblins. As the book points out, they do not like to use their title's name around hobgoblins because it sounds demeaning, for obvious reasons.
Hmm.
Their main forces their clothes always carry a knotwork pattern resembling the thorns, and to sometimes acquire hobgoblin features, which that just sounds so cool to me. The Barons will offer internship to anyone who thinks they got the right stuff, but they have to prove it if they want to stay a member of the Order. Their privilege gives them bonuses to dealing with hobgoblins, whether that be socially or martially, and makes it easier to wander the hedge. Overall, pretty useful folks to have around.
Yeah. I love the knotwork clothing. Next up, we get the Court of the Solstice, which is one of my favorites here. I think that they should have their own section and not be lumped into entitlements, but whatever. They are sort of a sanctuary for an eclectic mix of courtless idealists and in-betweens, the cranks and the rebels. They think, at least, that they're on the path to becoming a proper court, with their key emotion being desperation. And their privilege lets them gather glamour from that emotion. It's kind of like an amalgam of all the others. The way they present it, I thought, is pretty interesting. They favor symbols of time and transition in their look with means that project balance. They're kind of outcasts and trailblazers. They tend to be solitary, but they're growing increasingly organized, with their eldest member as their putative monarch as they try and angle for great court status.
I had a couple of minor issues with them. One is that oftentimes they seem more defined by what they're not rather than what they are.
Hmm.
And secondarily, the idea that we have an entire entitlement, a whole thing about this court seeking recognition, it's such a big deal, feels undermined by our previous book where it says things like, yeah, there's tornado season here, so there's just a tornado court in addition to the Supreme Court. Yep, they just exist.
Well, so I almost see them as like disruptors in specific freeholds where the four great courts have an ironclad control and they say, no, we are just having spring, summer, autumn, winter. And they come in and they say, well, we don't want to play by those rules. So there are other freeholds, I imagine, where people are like, okay, yeah, whatever. But I would place them in that context to give them more story weight, I guess. But yeah, I mean, fair points.
So I would certainly still enjoy seeing them showing up in a game.
Unlike
After
the
this,
next ones.
yes, the Duchy of Truth and Loss. These ones hunt and slay, or otherwise deal with, the fetches of changelings who have not yet returned from Arcadia, and only those fetches. If you have returned, they do not help you with your fetch. That is an interesting distinction. Aspirants must discover a fetch on their own, which is very difficult to do, then hunt it alongside existing members of the Order. So, teamwork, I appreciate they give you that. Their faces take on a predatory appearance, and their hands become clawed and skeletal. Gosh, that's unsettling. Their privileges are a pair of tokens: a concealed breastplate and the false face of truth, which is a pin shaped like a face, which will tell you if somebody is a fetch if you feed it hair or blood.
Yeah.
I love the practicality of both of these, the unsettlingness of the false face of truth, and the fact that their secondary token is just, yeah, but what if I get shot though?
Important considerations. Next up, we have the Eternal Echoes, who preserve the histories and biographies of the lost, mostly orally, because it's risky to write all this stuff down for keepers to find. Naturally, they are super attentive, they're observant, they're good listeners. They have this trick of perfectly recording and sharing memories of a scene they experience, including after one of them dies, which is creepy and cool. Again,
Right, they can transfer knowledge upon death, which is such a cool feature. I wish more privileges were like what the Eternal Echoes get because, gosh, it just defines so much about them.
yeah. And they tend to be ones who had strong positive memories of their lives before their abduction, and also a selfless attitude, but not a reckless one, towards gathering the memories of others. So, yeah, they're like a living library kind of thing, and another one of my favorites.
Next up, we get the Gold Spinners Guild. They can provide you fantastic wealth for an honest pledge, but they have no mercy for those who renege. They are the classic Fae who take straw and literally spin it into gold. Pretty cool and useful. Thing is, they take only people who truly understand the benefits of wealth and plan to better the lives of others. So if you're in this to get rich quick for yourself, they're not going to take you. Their mean changes their hands to be flecked with gold. And while they can literally spin gold, it turns back into useless material unless they make a pledge with someone else as the beneficiary. So, very interesting if you want to get into the idea of what is the value of wealth. Literally, like, how do you philosophically value it? And I think that they're an interesting exploration of that question, especially with the fact that you have to make a pledge with them in order to get anything out of it.
The Rumpelstiltskins.
Yes.
Then we get the Guild of the Sacred Journey, sworn messengers and couriers between freeholds. They have protected political neutral status while they're on the job. Many interviews to join this elite and kind of discriminatory order. They're just like really snobby. They only accept the fairest. I was like, does somebody have a mail carrier fetish with this? Because they're really into...
I made a note here that they do it apparently out of bigotry. This is, I think, the only example we have up to this point of an entitlement that is based upon a seeming,
Right.
which should be cool, but makes no sense.
Yeah, it doesn't come over well.
Yeah, it's nothing to do with what their job is.
Yeah. Regardless, they must love travel, whether they're jet setters or drifters or pilots, and they have this elaborate formal guild structure where the regional guild masters maintain guild houses and archive collected gossip and information. The diplomatic immunity is itself a huge privilege, but they also get this winged sash token that intuitively points them where to go once they've taken a delivery commission. So a little bit of an issue vibe.
Very useful stuff.
Yeah. Tell us about my other favorite.
Oh, the Knights of the Knowledge of the Tongue? Yes, I love them too, and their heraldry of a big cauldron with a bunch of cooking utensils around it. So, this is an order of expert chefs and gourmands who scour the hedge for exotic ingredients and whom have mastered the art of cooking the impossible and deadly foods found only in the thorns. These knights create stories just by the existence of the order itself. Huge inspiration. They'll recruit anybody with a passion and a talent for cooking. Their tongues always change in some strange way. They carry an order that reflects your attitude toward them, so everybody gets a unique sensory experience. And they wear chef outfits that are basically Kevlar.
It's like the Delicious in Dungeon. That's it. It's like that show. You could run
Fantastic
stories
show.
like that. Yeah, no, they're so melodramatic, and I love them. Melodramatic foodie changelings.
I cannot overstate how full I feel after reading this because they get into so much foodie terminology with them that I am far out of my depths and feeling truly inspired. Their privilege, called tracking those tenuous tastes, gives them a huge bonus to hunting down anything related to preparing a dish, which sounds really cool if you decide, I'm going to go hunt down a dragon in the hedge. Being one of these chef knights is a perfect archetype to play someone who goes on adventures through the hedge. I love them.
Next up is the Legacy of the Black Apple, which is one of the two Eldritch Orders.
Boy.
It starts with this dark story about a beggar negotiating the return of a stolen child from the Fae in exchange for his own life and an apple, which he stole when he escaped. So that kind of sets the tone for their mission of negotiating with keepers. They perfectly understand this is neither safe nor sane, and because of that, you need Weird 5 and Clarity 6 to join, because this is playing at the highest levels. They don't recruit, one must petition to join, whether out of glory or altruism. Their mien gets an apple or cidery scent, and they get little bits of necrotic skin kind of through their mien. They balance their humility, because you need it before the keepers, and their vanity, because they think they can get the better of them, and occasionally they succeed. They're very sort of silver-tongued negotiators. Their privilege, useful and dangerous. Keepers will always allow them speaking time, and they have exceptional success on 3 successes for manipulation rolls. And if anyone attacks them, they have this Black Apple Pendant token, which makes their attackers feel drunk. Don't mess with them.
When you petition to join them, they tell you, okay, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to go negotiate with a dangerous hobgoblin or one of the true fae. You're going to watch and see what this is like, and then you tell me if you want to join. Then they push the petitioner out to go do the negotiation themselves and see how they handle it.
Trial by fire.
After that, for those of you who love crossover, you gotta read about the Lord Sages of the Unknown Reaches. These are the ones who study other supernaturals in order to protect their freehold. Their eyes glow, and their clothes are decorated with occult symbols reflecting the wider supernatural world. They are pulled from changelings who already experienced things like vampires and mages and werewolves. They gain a bonus to socializing with a specific supernatural subgroup, tend to possess supernatural merits. They don't just get one, but it's more of a, hey, storyteller, I kind of have permission. And they can acquire a supernatural talent or fetish, which means they can go to werewolves and say, can I have one of your cool magical items? And werewolves go, sure, you can use this.
And just to confirm, their iconography is just like a mashup of all the other games' iconography, right? Like I see the mage symbols worked in.
Yes, I think that is just all of them, which you have to imagine would be unsettling for any other supernatural to see. Just go in front of a mage and be like, hey, so I represent this order, and then hold out the heraldry.
Hold up their entire language. I like the idea of it shifting as well, like as they interact. Anyway, next up is the other Eldritch Order, the Lost Pantheon. They resolve to be primordial gods to mortals. They have a raw power and faded clarity that makes other Lost naturally uneasy. Lots of beasts and elementals inspired by specific god forms. They need to have Weird 6, Metal 4, Clarity less than or equal to 6. And the reason for this is that one of their privileges is that their divine transformation reverses the perception penalties from low clarity. So as their clarity goes down, they get more and more supernaturally aware. They also get more bonus lifespan from Weird. They can distill glamour from Worship and get bonuses to all rolls against the gentry and the minions. Super powerful. Otherwise, they're kind of just typical pagan gods. Like they organize themselves into little godly families, and they are just as sort of like passionate and mercurial as any Greek god might be.
I love the concept, and one correction, I believe that it's not that they get more out of the weird, it's that lost dots of clarity effectively act as extra dots of weird for them.
Well, so, yeah, sorry. Yes.
I love the Lost Pantheon. I like the idea of changelings who get so wrapped up in their own hype that they think they're gods, and some of them have the moxie to pull off that delusion. The fact they can gain glamour from prayer is...
Yeah.
A last note, unlike every other order I've found, you don't petition or have other people come to you. Most, quote-unquote, join simply by following a call in their dreams, and somehow that just makes them become a member of the Lost Pantheon.
If you're driven to be a god, be a god. And if someone asks you if you're a god, you say, indubitably. Last but not least...
the Order of the Onerophysics. This is for everybody who's ever looked at oniromancy in Changeling and said, this is cool, but I need more.
Who says that?
People who have run more Changeling than I have, or who make their games entirely about dreams, and I've got to say, that's already a difficult subject to get into, so I don't see this group coming up a lot, but I think they're cool, and I'll tell you about them. They want to heal people, and they do so through dreams. Joining is as simple as being an aspiring oniromancer, and sometimes it happens automatically. I wrote that down and forget what that means. Maybe it's just like the Lost Pantheon and you just feel like you're going to do it. As they grow in power, become more and more translucent. Their privilege allows them to enter dreams, even outside of the hedge, and to do fantastic dream healing while they are within the minds of other people. They're also unusual in that they have 4 ranks within their organization.
Yeah.
And with that, we've come to an end about the orders. What do you think about this batch of orders that we got, Puka?
Yeah, I mean, they're all fine. I like the ones that add solid new directions to the game for exploration. So things like Harvesting Desperation or Worship, or the memory trading of the echoes. Those interest me more than this one's all about hunting down fetches, or this one's all about just pretending to be a god. You certainly could get involved enough with any of those to build a solid game around them. The Knights of the Knowledge of the Tongue I just love because they're ridiculous, and any game you build around them will be so much fun. But It did also differ from the courts in that they stuck more closely to the format, like the structure of the organization for each of them, but with a lot of variation. So I appreciated that for the writing. They're more bite-sized than the courts. You don't have to worry about their opinions on each other or their overall purpose in society, but they still feel three-dimensional, which is nice.
I think that between what we have in this book and the previous books, that there's an order for anybody. I think that any player character could find some entitlement that they would want for their characters.
Yeah.
I'm curious, while we're on the subject, do you feel like that's the same in Dreaming for houses?
No.
That's a big deal, but not mandatory, and you just answered.
Yeah, no, just flat no. They're sort of in between houses and societies in Dreaming, and I don't know, I think it's apples and oranges for a lot of reasons. But
Fair to leave it at that.
yeah.
I guess we should do our final thoughts on the book then.
Yeah, well, so the book as a whole, I'm overall okay with it. I thought chapter 1 was kind of thin. I expected more, as we talked about. Chapter 2 was very useful and robust, but the question of how much goes on outside of those courts, like within a freehold, or even it doesn't get as deep of an answer. I kind of wanted more with the heraldry because they kind of signaled that, and I was like, oh, maybe we'll get cool like court heraldry beyond the regular one. Like I said before, the Autumn Court was my favorite for the level of nuance, but I could see things I could use in each of them. And while I like the entitlements overall, the fact that there were ones I had no real interest in them, and then there were ones that I could see idea after idea, there's an unevenness to it. So overall, I think it achieved what I wanted from it, which was to lay out more interpersonal and intra-freehold social dynamics. The main thing I felt it missed was getting into how those dynamics shake out within a motley as advice for players and storytellers. But a dedicated table would have enough to figure that out on their own.
My thoughts are similar with the couple of additions. I think that the fact we both had different things we loved about this book goes to show that there's probably something in here for everybody. If you have any interest in understanding how freeholds work in general, how the courts work specifically, or you just want a bunch more orders to look at, it's going to be worth looking at. You're probably not going to like everything, but I would be shocked if you don't like something in here, that there's not something that you love. The second thing is that, as we discussed most notably with the freehold section and with the summer court especially, the book does sometimes handle sensitive subject matters with a lack of care. And readers should be aware of that when reading it, that you may need to do a bit of extra heavy lifting on your side than the authors were giving at the time when making the book. But even with those flaws, I think it's a fantastic read and an excellent addition to the pantheon of Changeling the Lost books.
Yeah.
And speaking of which, Puka, what will we be talking about next?
We'll be walking down the Equinox Road. In the meantime, though, if you would like to keep the conversation going, we have a few social media things to shout about. You can chat with us on Discord at discord.me/CTP. You can email us at podcast@changelingthepodcast.com. Reach out to us on Facebook or YouTube at Changeling the Podcast. We have a Mastodon at dice.camp at changelingpod and Patreon at Changeling the Podcast. Links to all of these will be in the show notes to this episode.
And with that, we draw a close to tonight's Freehold meeting. All of you, thank you for coming. We hope you enjoyed the snacks.
Yes.
Our applause to the wax magistrates for making sure that everything went smoothly.
Oh, they didn't do anything.
Never tell them that. Next, you'll be insulting the Knights of the Tongue.
Never.
And then who will cook our food?
Never. Yeah.
Politics.
So I've been Puka.
And I am Fetch.
And stay cool.
Given that the fairest have cliquish postal workers as their bespoke entitlement, we were left to wonder what ill-suited occupations the other seemings might have for theirs. Every freehold should have one of the smarmy lounge singer beasts and a confrontational jungle DJ ogre for their parties, while diplomatic efforts may or may not benefit from elemental interpreters who render things in the target language as emotionally as possible. Your embittered Darkling cleaning service will get into the Hollow's hardest-to-reach nooks and crannies, and surely every wizened lungs to be accepted into the guild of unhelpful nightclub coat checkers. If someone loses their ticket, you get to keep what's in the pocketses. Of course, the entitlement we support most strongly is the Order of Esteemed Patrons for our show, whose ranks you can easily join at www.patreon.com/changelingthepodcast. No dots and mantle required. Current membership includes Bad Company, Derek, Dorcadus, Elleris, Hugo the Bogperson, Ia Bull, Jason Vines, Oreo, Raz Caboose, Sandjigger, Sija, Simon Strand, and Ware Buffalo. But even uncapitally entitled listeners are welcome to drop by and chit-chat on our Discord at www.discord.me/ctp. Or else you can leave a review on the podcast listening platform of your greatest convenience. Thanks for your time and attention. May you earn the goodwill of whichever courts you deserve, and until you do, try to keep on dreaming.